Okay, well, I think we have a critical mass, so let's get started. Um, Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Measure AA Grants webinar. I'm Jessica Davenport, Deputy Program Manager for the Restoration Authority, and my colleague Linda Tong and I will be presenting information about the 2021 grant round and the Community Grants program. So first, we'd like to find out a little bit about you. Please fill out the Zoom poll to let us know what type of organization you represent. Cool, thank you for filling that out. We've got a good mix of people here. Let's see. I think most people have filled it out by now. Great, thank you so much. So let's go to our next slide. So what is the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority? It was created to fund shoreline projects that will protect, restore, and enhance San Francisco Bay. Measure AA, which passed in June of 2016, generates funds to accomplish the Restoration Authority's mission. So this is a $12 per year parcel tax that generates $500 million over 20 years for restoration around San Francisco Bay. It passed with 70% of the voter support in the 9-county Bay Area. And complete restoration is estimated to cost over $2 billion. So Measure AA funds will leverage state and federal funds. The jurisdiction of the agency is the shoreline of the 9 counties of the San Francisco Bay Area, excluding the Delta primary zone. Next slide, please. There's a little bit of a lag, so I'll just wait. Great. So the Restoration Authority grant requirements are based on both the Restoration Authority Act of 2018 and Measure AA, passed in 2016. So based on the Restoration Authority Act, the enabling legislation, the authority can fund habitat projects that will restore, protect, or enhance tidal wetlands, manage ponds, or natural habitats along the shoreline, and flood management features that are part of a habitat project, and also public access or recreational amenities that are part of a habitat project. Next slide, please. So who are the eligible grantees and locations? It's a pretty wide range, actually. Our eligible applicants include federal, state, and local agencies, tribal governments, nonprofit organizations, and owners and operators of shoreline parcels. And the eligible locations are the shoreline of the 9 counties of the Bay Area, excluding Delta primary zone, as I just mentioned. And then for more specifics, you can check out our request for proposal, which is located on the grants webpage. So you can actually see a map of the Delta primary zone if you're wondering about that. And next slide, please. So you may be wondering, what do we mean by along the shoreline? And this is something that a definition that we've developed with approval from our board. So it means subtidal habitats, in other words, areas lying below mean low tide within a reasonable distance of the shoreline. The baylands, which are areas that lie between the high and low tides, and also includes those areas that would be covered by the tides in the absence of levees or other unnatural structures, and includes the portions of creeks or rivers that are located below the head of tides, so the place where the tide moves up into those creeks or rivers. And then we would also consider projects in transition zones, uplands adjacent to potential or actual tidal wetlands that can provide transitional habitat, or marsh migration space, which are the areas that are needed to enhance the project's resilience to projected sea level rise. Next slide, please. So the eligible project phases, that's a pretty big list. We really would consider anything from acquisition to planning, design, permitting, construction, or other types of implementation, and monitoring and maintenance. But regardless of what phase the project is in, it's important to start thinking about how to engage the surrounding communities for a more robust project. And partnerships are really key in this. So for example, think about what local organizations you can partner with to combine a strong habitat restoration proposal with strong community engagement, especially if you can involve economically disadvantaged communities. That's a plus. That's one of our priorities. And a tip sheet on meaningful community engagement from the State Coastal Conservancy is linked here and in our application materials. The grant application asks how the project will seek community involvement and what community benefits it is expected to provide. And the application checklist includes the option to have support letters from community representatives. Next slide, please. Our grant requirements are based on both the enabling legislation, which I discussed previously, and on Measure AA. So all proposals must protect, restore, enhance habitat and meet at least one of the Measure AA for programs. The first program is Safe, Clean Water and Pollution Prevention Program. So specific activities that are eligible include reducing pollution, engaging in restoration activities, shoreline cleanup and trash removal, and restoring wetlands and creeks. Again, projects would need to meet the Restoration Authority Act and Measure A eligibility. So for example, a shoreline cleanup proposal would also need to make the case that it will protect, enhance, or restore habitat. Next slide, please. The second Measure AA program is the Vital Fish, Bird, and Wildlife Habitat Program. Specific activities that are eligible include protecting and restoring wetlands and other shoreline habitats to benefit shorebirds, waterfowl, and fish, and providing for stewardship, maintenance, and monitoring of restoration projects. Next slide, please. The third program is the Natural Flood Protection Program. Specific activities that are eligible include providing nature-based flood protection through wetland and habitat restoration, and building or improving flood protection levees that are a necessary part of wetland restoration activities. Next slide, please. The fourth program is the Shoreline Public Access Program. Specific activities that are eligible include constructing and managing public access trails and related facilities, and providing interpretive materials and outreach events to the bay to protect the bay's health and encourage community engagement. And I will now hand off the presentation to Linda Tong to discuss the grant application processes.
Thanks, Jessica. So now I'm going to go over both our regular grant round process as well as our community grants program. So I'm going to go over our regular grant round first. Here's an overall process of what the application process would look like. So you all are highly encouraged to submit a pre-application to us first. And the pre-application just asks for basic information on the project, the schedule, budget, potential partners. And then after we get the pre-application, we'll schedule a meeting with you so we can chat about your pre-application and give you some initial feedback. Full applications will be due October 7th. And then once all applications are in, reviewers will be reviewing the whole batch of applications later in the year. And then Staff will be recommending projects to our governing board for funding next year. So just to reiterate, the application will be due October 7th, and pre-applications are strongly encouraged. You can email any questions and any files to grants@sfbayrestore.org. Award dates for these grants will start in spring of 2022. And the total amount of funding available for our grant round is up to $12 million. There is no minimum or maximum grant request requirement per proposal. And for more information, visit our website. So in addition to the eligibility criteria that Jessica had talked through, there are a list of 9 priority criteria for Measure AA. And projects will be evaluated based on, not just based on how many of these criteria that a project meets, but how well it meets one or some or many of these criteria. So for example, one of our priorities is leveraging state and federal dollars or public and private partnerships. So though matching funds aren't a requirement for our grants, if your project does raise a lot of state and federal or local dollars, that is a plus. Another example would be if a project incorporates workforce training and development and does a lot of local hiring, that will be a plus for us in our evaluations. And the third category that we evaluate projects on is the likelihood of success of the project. And that's based on the applicant's capacity and resources to complete and maintain the project. And for that, we look at the applicant's history and whether they have a track record of completing similar projects, or if they have a lot of community support. We also look at the budget and schedule to see if it's well thought out and reasonable and seems feasible. And we also base the project's likelihood of success on the project's level of community involvement and benefits or innovative partnerships. And for that, we look at things such as what partners you list for your proposal, any letters of support that you can get, benefits to economically disadvantaged communities, along with other parts of your application. And you can refer to our request for proposals for the full list and more details. So you might be wondering when we say innovative partnerships and community benefits. So we've defined innovative partnerships as collaboration between community-based nonprofits, environmental nonprofits, federal, state, local, tribal governments, healthcare providers, or other organizations. So if you feel like your proposal has created partnerships between many different organizations, then please describe that to us and make the case that they are innovative partnerships. And then as to benefits to communities, especially economically disadvantaged communities, we want to see that the project has direct involvement and support of local community groups, and that it might alleviate multiple stressors within a community, such as need for recreational amenities, resilience to climate change, or leadership development opportunities. And we've also included a link to some examples of strategies for community engagement. And we'll be sharing these slides with you all afterwards, so you can click on these links. And just some application tips for the regular grant round. You'll want to make sure to review the eligibility criteria and priority criteria for Measure AA, and think about how your project shows likelihood of success. The scoring information is all within our request for proposals as well, so you can go back and refer to that. Out of 100 points, 20 go to the evaluation of eligibility, how the project meets eligibility criteria. 40 points go to how the project meets our priority criteria, and 40 points go to the project's likelihood of success. But in addition to numerical scoring, we also take into account reviewers' qualitative comments as well. Again, pre-applications are encouraged, and make sure you complete a full application, which includes a PDF, which has a template for our cover pages, Word application, and then there's an Excel template for a budget. The application also asks for maps and photos and optional letters of support. And you can submit all of that to grants@sfbayrestore.org. And if you are looking for additional resources, including a grant round FAQ, you can visit our grants webpage. And we just want to give a couple examples of some projects that we have funded through the grant round. One is the Herons Head Park Shoreline Resilience Project, where they hired and trained local young adults in bay ecology and hands-on conservation. And that was a grant to the Port of San Francisco. Another example is the Lower Walnut Creek Restoration Project, which will restore creekside wetland habitat by breaching levees to introduce tides to diked baylands. And that's the grant to the Contra Costa County. And you can look at our website. There is a page that shows our full list of projects that we funded. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the community grants program. The application process is slightly different because we mean for the community grants program to support community-based organizations within economically disadvantaged communities. The eligibility criteria that, again, Jessica went over is the same, but I'll go into some detail of how it's different from the regular grant. So again, here's the process. There is a community grants application that you all can submit. And then staff will schedule a meeting with the applicant to give some initial feedback. Then the applicant can have the chance to revise their application, submit it back to us. And that's when we'll do our formal review. And if reviewers feel like it's a project that we should be moving forward, then staff will be working with the applicant to develop a full proposal that can then be brought to our board for funding. So the community grants program is accepted on a rolling basis. You can submit your initial application at any time, and then we'll get back to you to set up a meeting, and then we can go from there. Again, any questions and files should be emailed to grants@sfbayrestore.org. And award dates for these grants would also be on a rolling basis. The funding availability is up to $100,000 per project. And for more information, we have a page on our website dedicated to community grants. So just a little more detail about what qualifies for our community grants program, just because we understand that the traditional phases of a restoration project might not cover what's needed for a process to really be community-led. So we just want to call out some specifics of what we would be able to fund. That includes community planning and visioning, training to develop, apply for, and implement small shoreline habitat projects, and supporting communities and gaining knowledge of shoreline issues and building relationships with agencies and nonprofits. And all of these activities would be leading to implementation of a habitat project or future implementation of a habitat project. The priority criteria for the community grants program here are the same, but we focus on 2 of them, and they are benefiting economically disadvantaged communities and engaging youth and young adults. And a few more priority criteria that's just specific to this program. We want to see that projects can achieve community benefits in the foreseeable future. So, within 1 to 5 years. We want to see that the project has a well-defined community engagement process. And we want to know how urgent this project is. Is there a pressing need for this project? And then again, projects will also be evaluated based on their likelihood of success. And this is the same as the regular grant round. We'll be looking at the applicant's capacity and resources to complete and maintain the project, as well as the level of community involvement and or innovative partnerships the project has. Some tips: make sure to review our eligibility criteria, look at the community grants program priority criteria, and then just be sure to describe how your project would be successful. You can submit all materials to our email, and refer to our website for more information. And an example of one community grant project that we funded is the Marin City Urban Wetland Community Visioning Project. And that's to conduct, excuse me, an engagement process and planning process to restore a degraded water detention basin and into wetland or open water habitat in Marin City. And actually, this might be interesting to note. So it's a grant to the Center for Volunteer and Nonprofit Leadership, but they are a fiscal sponsor for a local grassroots group. So if you are a local group that is not like a formalized like nonprofit, you can always get a fiscal sponsor. And you can view our webpage for the full list of funded projects. And that's all we have for you. We're happy to take questions.
Linda, I've been answering a few of the questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
But there's one that I thought we could maybe both take a stab at.
Mhm.
that came in that can you talk about anything that is new in this round? And my initial response would be it's very minor changes. The only kind of substantive change is that we previously used the same pre-application for the regular grant round and the community grants program. And but then the community grants applicants did not need to fill out the full application. And just because that was confusing to call that the pre-application, we now just renamed for that, for the community grants. It's just called the community grants application. So it's just sort of a minor change in the way that we explain what it is, but what we're asking for is pretty much the same in the pre-application for the competitive grant round and then the application for the community grant round, with the idea that, as Linda mentioned, we will work with the project proponent to further develop the project to the stage where it can be brought to the board, where it has all the information that would be in a typical full proposal in the regular grant round. And we just got a bunch more questions. So would a wetland restoration project located just south of Imola Avenue in Napa, within the South Napa wetlands area from a location perspective, be eligible? So I prefer to, look a little bit more closely than answer this in the webinar format. I can certainly get back to you about that. But the principle that you'd be looking at, is it below the head of tide? So that would be the criteria for whether a project along a creek or river is eligible. So then we have a question about, do letters of support need to be specific to this application, or can they be generic in support of the project? That's a good question. I mean, usually they are in support of the specific project. That's kind of the typical way letters of support work. But if it's easier to just, compile some general letters of support that you have for the project, as long as there's a good amount of overlap between what you're actually applying for and the, what the letters are referencing. I think that would probably be okay. Any thoughts about that, Linda?
Yeah, I would say the same. They can be, generic in support of a project, as long as, it is really talking about what you're applying for. If it's like this, if it's the same general project.
Yeah, and I think if you are going to get letters of support generated, I just want to encourage people they can be addressed to our chair, Dave Pine, but you don't need to send them to him. Just include them in the packet with your application, and don't send them like separately to our office. It's just much easier to keep track of them if they all come, you collect them and then you include them in your application packet. And there's a question, how do I receive a copy of this slide presentation? It will be posted to our grants page of our website. And I answered a question about that previously. So if you look up in the Q&A, the answered questions, I think you can see that, but I put the link there. I think you might have the link in the presentation too, right, Linda? Maybe if you go back a few slides. Okay. So another question is about public access activities and the definition of transition zones. Along the shoreline from Emeryville to Richmond, there are fewer traditional habitat restoration projects, yet there are many needs for public access, engaging youth, education, pollution reduction, and workforce development. So if a public access project engages people to visit the shoreline, but not actually something tough, maybe there's a typo, a tidal wetland, oh, touch maybe. Is this a valid location? You know, we have to go back to the Restoration Authority Act, which says it's to fund habitat projects and public access that's part of a habitat project. So I think if you can, and one of the ways that we assess that is if you had a habitat project that had an environmental document, like an environmental impact report, for example, and it referenced that the Bay Trail, for example, was part of that project, then we would consider that part of a restoration project. So again, I'm open to discussing this more. I think there are habitat projects along the shoreline there, or potential habitat projects. We've actually had quite a few projects in the East Bay, and there's currently a project with the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project that is engaged both in bringing people to the shoreline and has education, but it also will lead to the development of habitat projects or engagement in planning for habitat projects. So there needs to be some kind of linkage, but happy to talk to you more about that if you'd like to set up consultation about a specific area. Next question is, can one expand on an existing community-based program with an existing Measure AA grant by applying for a community-based grant? Well, one thing I think in general, the answer would be yes, but one thing to keep in mind is that the Community Grants Program is intended to fund community-based organizations located in economically disadvantaged communities, as shown in the maps on our website. So just make sure that if you're expanding on an existing project, the applicant for the community-based grant is a community-based organization located in the EDC. Okay, someone said we cannot see the answered questions. Okay, so yes, I will read them out then. So is the instruction for letters of support to be collected, then include them in our packet, written explicitly? Some of our supporters have previously expressed concern about the process and what is appropriate. Any reassurance we can share with them would be a great help. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We can, obviously we can't change the RFP because it's already been approved by our board, but I think we could put some, a message on our website that said that. That would be helpful. So I'm going to jump back to the answered questions. Oh, the first one was, will the slides be available? And the answer is yes, as well as the recording of the webinar on the grants page that's listed on the slide that we have up now. And then the question was, another question was, is $12 million the total amount of funding available in this round of funding, or is $12 million the maximum each potential grantee can apply for? And it is the former. The $12 million is total amount of funding available in this round. And just so you're aware, the parcel tax does generate more like 25 million a year, but we have a small part of that that goes to administrative overhead. And then we also have an $11.4 million per year commitment for 5 years to the South Bay Shoreline Project, which is still covering this current round. So that's why you'd normally see something like 23 million available in a grant round. And this year it's closer to 12 million. Let me see what other.
We have someone with their hand raised.
Oh, okay. Do you want to unmute them?
Okay. Winifred, you should be able to speak.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just wondering, what about a school whose students are primarily from economically disadvantaged community, yet the school itself is not in what would be characterized as an economically disadvantaged community? Like programs that would involve the students in marsh restoration and things like that. Would that be eligible?
I think it would depend. I mean, you're talking about a community grant or a regular grant?
Well, that's what I'm not sure, because we were thinking of working with a nonprofit organization that has programs set up that where they engage students and teachers in marsh restoration.
Yeah, yeah.
And we were thinking of doing a restoration project here, and you know, but the school itself is not in what would be characterized as an economically disadvantaged neighborhood. Yet I would say the student population is drawn principally from an economically disadvantaged community, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes. That, I think the key point is who is the grantee, because the school would not be the grantee. Sounds like it would be the nonprofit.
I think if they're the ones if they're working with the school and yet they are initiating the program, but it would be on school property, I guess it might be, I guess the person that's actually carrying out the program would be the grantee, I'm thinking.
Yeah, so what we've seen so far is we've had grants like this for 2 nonprofits in the regular grant round that are working with children from disadvantaged communities, or not just children, but could be youth, like eco apprentices.
Right.
Like up until early 20s, and involving them in restoration on the shoreline. And then we've had school groups as well through the regular grant round. But as far as a community grant, again, it has to be, the grantee has to be a community-based organization in a economically disadvantaged community.
Okay, so the regular grant would be probably the better route to take.
It sounds like it,
Yes.
if your nonprofit is not meeting that criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and the pre-application process is great for us to get to know about your project idea.
Oh, that's right.
We can always give you feedback then.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, and I am seeing another question. Is it possible that you'll ask to reduce a grant budget to stretch the funds? Yes, we have done that in the past and likely in the future. So it's good to ask for what you need. Obviously, if you have other sources of funding, it's important to let us know, even if they're pending. And so basically the project is evaluated on its merits. And then once we know the set of projects that are, looking very strong, then we would look at, well, how much money do we have available? And how many projects can we fund, and would we want to maybe reduce the budget of one in order to enable more to be funded. So that is a possibility. Okay, how can one learn more about existing projects like the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project example? I did not see that on your website. Okay, so if you go to our website and there's a tab called projects, and then you go down to current projects, each of the projects that we've funded is listed there, and that one is called the Oakland Shoreline Leadership Academy. So look for that title. And then there's a brief description as well as the full staff recommendation, which has a bit more detail. So if you have any trouble, just email us, but it is there on the website. Let's see, did I get all the questions? Does anybody else want to speak in person? Okay.
There are a couple participants with raised hands.
Okay.
Winifred, I think, did you raise your hand again?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yes, yeah.
James Collins.
Yes, hi, good morning, and thank you for having this call. My question is, are there like case studies of projects that have been taken about over the years of Measure AA that we can go to our board to say, hey, this could be something that can scale to our capacity to work on this?
So, sorry, what is your board? What is your organization?
So I work with California Council of the Blind currently. However, we also do partner with other environmental organizations throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. And so I'm just trying to gather if this is even something that we could even attempt to approach in terms of restoration projects under Measure AA.
So you're trying to understand, like, is there case studies of types of organizations that haven't traditionally been involved in habitat restoration that would want to get involved in it?
Yes, correct, yes.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the focus of the community grants program, is because there are groups that have been working with their communities for many years on a variety of issues, like providing food through food banks or doing outreach to educate people about healthy food. And they're sort of in the ballpark of what we're doing, because like healthy people, healthy land, healthy ecosystem. And so they may have never done a habitat restoration project, but they are finding a partner usually who can help with the scientific side of things and make sure, like, if they're doing some planting, they're choosing the right kinds of plants and have the right kind of irrigation to make sure the plants survive, and or plant at the right time of year and things like that. So if they, if you don't have experience with on the ground habitat projects, it is a good idea to find a partner like Save the Bay or some group like that. For example, like Grassroots Ecology in the Peninsula is working with Linda, help me. It used to be Acterra.
CRC, Climate Resilient Communities.
Yeah, so that's a group that had been focused on educating people about climate resilience and sea level rise. They hadn't done on the ground habitat work, but they partner with Grassroots Ecology, which has a lot of experience in on the ground restoration. So that's kind of, but you know, the CRC has all this trust built up in the community and relationships. And so there's a good opportunity to encourage people from the community who might not have originally come out to participate in a restoration project, even though it's in their neighborhood, because they're like, oh, that's not for me. But when Grassroots Ecology is going to work with this partner that has built those relationships, they're hopeful that they'll engage people who haven't been involved in the past. Does that help?
Yeah.
Oh,
And
sorry.
then I would add that on our projects page, we have short descriptions for the Oakland Shoreline Leadership Academy, as well as the Marin City Urban Wetland Community Visioning Project. So you could take a look at those. And then we could have like a separate conversation, because we have a few projects that aren't funded yet, but they should be coming online. So if you want to have a separate chat, I think Jessica and I can have that with you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, was there anyone else with their hand up? I don't see anyone. Let me check the Q&A one more time. Would infrastructure elements be considered for funding for the creation of a wetland habitat for a primary or secondary Sassoon Marsh location? So infrastructure elements, I mean, the Restoration Authority Act does allow eligibility for infrastructure that would provide flood protection or public access facilities. So I don't know if that's what you mean by infrastructure, but those infrastructure elements would be considered for funding. And as far as the primary or secondary Sassoon Marsh locations, the Sassoon Marsh is definitely part of the jurisdiction. And I would say that the primary zone of the Sassoon Marsh is more what we would consider in terms of baylands, because that's the wet area. The secondary zone of the Sassoon Marsh, it would just depend if you could make the case that it was an adjacent upland to a tidal marsh, or that would allow for marsh migration with sea level rise, projected sea level rise. So yeah, it would depend on the exact location, but it certainly wouldn't be ruled out. Let's see. Oh, infrastructure such as irrigation or lift pumps. So yeah, I mean, we have a project that's funded right now in the Sassoon Marsh that's rehabilitating fish screens. So that's kind of in the same ballpark. But again, it depends on the habitat benefits, or flood protection or public access benefits. So it should be probably presented in the context of the whole project and its habitat benefits. I wouldn't apply just for an irrigation system. I mean, you could, but I don't think that would be as competitive as something that really describes the habitat that's being created. And in general, I would say that, you know, we are looking to fund projects that are more self-sustaining, as far as like a tidal marsh that wouldn't need irrigation or pumps over time, but like irrigation could be like an interim solution for planting transition zone plants. But in general, we're looking to restore and enhance natural systems. But you know, it always depends on the specifics of the project. So it's worth exploring. Okay, let's see. can you speak to the public access, how urban trails that connect EDCs to habitat restoration can be eligible? Yeah, again, this kind of goes to the idea of a public access being part of a habitat project. So if it is part of it, then that could be eligible. If it's going like far away from the shoreline to try to connect people, that may be going outside of what we can legally fund. And some of these things, like, we're happy to talk to you about it. And then if it gets to a certain point, we might ask for advice from our attorneys, because it starts to become a question of like, how far can we stretch the definitions in our legislative authority? Okay, let me see. You see any other? Oh, there was one question that I answered that I don't think I read out, which was, is there a deadline for the pre-application submission? And we don't have a hard deadline, but I said that about a month in advance is a good idea. Once it starts to get really close to the actual application, full application deadline, it's hard to schedule, to fit everybody in and give you enough time to turn around the full proposal. So advise you to get your pre-application in by early September. Okay, let me see.
Well, that's all. I don't see any raised hands.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we can wrap up here. Thank you all so much for your great questions. And we definitely have some things to consider and look forward to hearing more from you. Again, if it's like a very simple question about like a location, whether it's eligible, we can probably answer that over email. If it's getting into sort of a more complex question, we can also try to do that over email. But if you're feeling like that it's a good possibility that you will be eligible, we would encourage you to go ahead and fill out the pre-application so that we can have a basis for discussion. It's nice to have something written down that we can look at and talk about together. So thanks again. And Linda, did you want to have any concluding remarks?
No, I think you covered it all. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.